Hi, I'm Clark on Temptress. In the past, I've done a couple videos where I talk about something technical, that's my channel. But in the video, I told a story about, cruising adventures I've had. And people comment about that a lot. So in today's video, I'm just going to tell you an adventure story. Today, I want to talk about the Kuna Indians. And these are the Indians that live in the San Blas Islands of Panama. This is probably the most beautiful place on earth. If you went back in time and you went to a bookstore and you saw the Cruising World calendar and you went through all the beautiful pictures, you would say, oh, it's Polynesia or whatever. But if you looked at the byline, they're almost always the San Blas. It is just that beautiful there. In 2002, I spent 3 months with the Kuna Indians, sometimes at the inhabited islands, sometimes at the out islands. Got to be quite friendly with them as far as I could because they spoke bad Spanish. Kuna is their #1 language. I speak bad Spanish. English is my #1 language. So, but we all had all the time in the world. While I was there, I got a unique experience. They were still really living a Stone Age existence. They dug out these things called ulus, which are a dugout canoe, and that's how they transported themselves around. And there was just virtually nothing modern there. Nowadays, I understand it's completely changed. They have outboard motors and, regular boats and hotels, and there's tourism. So this story might be the last, just from an anthropological point of view, describing the Kuna. Let me start with the history of the Kuna as I know it. And if I'm wrong, please correct me in the comments, but this is how it was explained to me. Long ago, the Kuna did not live in the San Blas. They lived up in the mountains like everybody else did, because if you went down to the coast, it was miserably hot, but also you died because there was yellow fever and malaria and whatever, all these diseases. And the Kuna lived up kind of where the Mayans and the Incas were. I guess it's Mayans in that area. And so it's not popular right now, but pre-conquistadors, the locals weren't real nice to each other. The Kuna were always a lesser tribe. They were taxed heavily by the major tribes like the Mayans. And they just had to deal with it. And they did for a long time. But I guess when the conquistadors came, that was just too much. And the Kuna did some amazing things, considering they were a Stone Age culture, and they were a lesser culture at the time, and they had, no concept of disease theory. They actually left, and they moved down to the coast, and to get to where they got, they had to go through swamps for a long time, and they figured out how to change from being a mountainous culture to a totally marine culture. And what they came up with is they found the San Blas Islands, and the islands are dry. There's no fresh water on the islands whatsoever. No fresh water means no mosquitoes. So how they set up life was the families, the women and children would live on the islands completely. And then every morning after the mosquitoes went away, because they're a dawn dusk type creature, the men would go to the mainland in the dugout canoes, and they would work the fincas, the farms, and work the land. They would collect food or do whatever's necessary, but most importantly, they would collect fresh water. And then they'd bring it back, and before the mosquitoes came out, they would be back at the island. And of course, they also developed quite the fishing culture, so because they just had everything available to them. And that worked. So they weren't getting malaria, they weren't getting yellow fever, they had that all solved. And they lived that way for quite some time. Then the Christian missionaries came, and they brought Catholicism. And these people really believe. They also brought basically chlorine bleach to treat the water. So the infant mortality went right down, as it would, because that's what kills babies in the third world is diarrhea. So they caused a population explosion. And it presented its way in the weirdest way. And then they did something I say is evil, because they also told all the women, you have to stop the art you're currently doing, which was painting themselves with berry juice and being topless and having these intricate designs. And you have to wear these Spanish peasant dresses. The Kuna women started a new art form where they took the same designs and they sewed them into something called a mola. And in all my traveling, it is one of three art that I actually collect. It's absolutely spectacular. And what it's done, what it is multiple layers of plain cotton cloth, monochrome, and then they cut down to the color they want, and then they hem it. Takes them months to make one. Well, make a pair. It's always a pair, front and back. You can get tourist molas in Panama City that they make special for the tourist market. They're just a few layers. But in my collection, it's all real molas. And you know they're real molas partly because no Kuna woman will sell you a new mola. She will finish a mola, she'll put it on her blouse, she'll take the old one off, and that's for sale because she wants it first. But I think that's extra special to have lightly used artwork. So they live in these, the islands are pretty small. And they live in these like 8-foot by 8-foot huts. And the populated islands, while I was there, were absolutely full of huts. Like you couldn't put another hut anywhere. They were built out over the water. Anywhere you could possibly build, they had built. Short of some of the islands had airstrips, and I'll get to that in a moment. They had a weird situation that seems to be like right out of science fiction, right? So they've got fresh water, if you take the ulu for it. They've got all the food in the world because the mainland is huge and they can just farm, as much as they need, so not a problem. They have all the fish they could possibly want because they're on islands on this bank. They do overfish, but in a way that didn't hurt anything at the time, and I'll explain that in a minute. So they have all the food in the world. The limiting factor is a place to sleep. And here's the sad thing. A Kuna mother, because they're Catholic and they have lots of children, knows that many of her children simply can't stay on the island. You can replace the population because you have no place for them to live, so they have to leave. And since they're Catholic, they're not into birth control, so there's a lot of kids. As far as I could tell from my time in Panama City, the only thing that a Kuna adolescent is qualified for in Panama City is to be a street alcoholic. So this is just like so damn sad that you have to say goodbye to your kids. They have to go to some place, and it seems to be Panama City a lot. And then they're just going to have this really horrible life where the rest of you have this absolutely idyllic life. Anyway, that just struck me a lot while I was there. If you're in the Kuna village and you look at the children, you will see the Kunas are very short people, and they're fairly dark skinned, as you'd imagine. And there'll be Kuna kid, really tall, blonde, white kid, Kuna kid. And when you first see them, you think, well, maybe some cruiser had a nice night, right? No. Kunas throw lots of albinos. They just have a lot of albinos in their genes. And these kids are living like right on the equator. So one of the things you do when you go into the Kuna Empire is bring a lot of sunscreen so you can give it away to all the albino kids and young adults because they get cancer and die. And the kids are, they're included, but they're kind of ostracized in a way. It makes sense. I'm sure that it's part of the culture to basically, these kids don't get married, let's say, because, they're going to die soon. They're just not going to live the full life, and you don't want lots of albino children. So you can see it in how the other kids are treating them and how they're treating themselves, and they always move to the back of the group. It's kind of sad. I met one albino Kuna that was 17, 18, and his English was really good comparatively. And we spent quite some time talking on the boat. I gave him the sunscreen, and I just remember he asked why. He didn't know what the sunscreen was. And I explained to him, you need this for the sun, my bad Spanish, right? So you won't turn red and hurt like I need this, you know. You could just see the man felt completely different for the first time in his life because they do look up to the boat owners. And he was like, I'm like you. I hope that comes across well. I'm not trying to diss anybody here and in this day and age, but that's how it is. And, also I gave him something that probably added years to his life. So I felt good about that too. Let's see. Another short story. I'm walking through the Kuna village one day, chatting with people, and I see a guy, working age, just sitting there with a towel over his legs. And, so I strike up a conversation, very approachable people. And, say, why aren't you fishing today? And he pulls the towel back, and he had a terrible wound. And it was infected, and there was just no medicine. So I go back to the boat, and I only had one big tube of Neosporin. So I got some aluminum foil and squirted it out, made him a little, packet of it, and, showed him how to apply it and everything. And, I didn't stay around long enough to know but the prognosis is that was a wound that should respond to a topical antibiotic. So it felt good doing that too. So you can help them out in lots of ways. Probably all changed now. Okay, I mentioned the airstrips. Now, every day, a little one-engine plane will come and do this short landing, skidding its wheels, and he'll land, and this guy will get out, and every pilot I talked to, they're all from New York City, and they had an accent and everything. What they were doing is buying mostly lobster, but other kinds of seafood from the Kuna. This was one of the ways the Kunas got hard currency, got cash. And the Kuna would bring in, bags of lobster just jammed into bags. And they were selling lobsters that were this long. And at first that bothered me. But then I realized that at the time, before the outboard motors, the Kuna could only go out fishing so far because they had to paddle. And the reefs went on and on and on. I took my boat way out into the reef and went to uninhabited islands a lot. So if you're a lobster and you're near the Kuna Islands, you're going to get wiped right out because they're going to take every one of you. But you're never going to wipe them all out because the big breeding lobsters live out there, and the lobsters say, oh, look, there's no lobsters here. And they're just constantly walking in towards the inhabited islands. So it was a balanced system that could work. I am afraid now that they have outboards, they probably are wiping out the fisheries, but that's their thing. And maybe not. There was local government, the chief of the island, and then there was the chief of all the Kuna. I actually checked into the chief of all the Kuna and got a stamp on my passport, visa. He had a stamp, and I think he had a stamp. Maybe we just wrote it out. But I spent so long there that I checked out of Panama. And then when I went into the Providencia, my next stop, I would have been, my Zarpe had expired. I would have been illegal coming in. And I said, oh, no, I've been in the Kuna Empire, not a real country. And the guy said, oh, cool. Yeah, we know the Kuna. Yeah. So it worked out okay. Okay. When you come into an anchorage near a Kuna island, before you get your anchor down, you're going to be mobbed with ulus full of women and children. And what they want to do is they want to sell you molas. And, get yourself anchored, of course, and then, invite them aboard and chat with them and stuff. I mean, you can only buy so many of these things if you're going to be there a long time. And a lot of the cruisers were saying, I don't want to go to the inhabited islands because I feel I have to buy molas. And I bought a whole bunch at first because I wanted them. And then when they would say, do you want molas? I would just say, yo tiene mucho molas. I have many molas. And then there was like, oh, can we see them? Because you realize they don't travel from island to island, but family is on other islands. So I'd bring out my molas, and this was a delight. This is what we talked about for the rest of the day. Now, I didn't understand all the Kuna, but it was obvious from the expressions. It's like, that's Betty's. I know her work, and it was just, it was a blast. And, we'd hang out and talk, and the children were excited because, big boat and everything. It was one of the pivotal, wonderful times I've had in my life was the time with the Kuna. I was aiming to go back down there before COVID. Of course, COVID stopped me and I only got as far as the DR. But the goal of that cruise was go down to Panama, spend some real time with the Kuna, and then I was going to go to Colombia and do some inland travel and such. Because when I was last down there, Colombia was dangerous, and now it's not so dangerous. Okay, so fast forwarding to several years later, I'm back in the United States. At the time of that cruise, I was married to a woman named Birgitta, and we decided to split up during the cruise. So when we got back, we split up. She went back to Europe. So I'm dating again, right? And I was dating some women, like 2 different times, that were working on advanced degrees in anthropology at like the university at Tampa. I don't forget the name of the university. There's a bunch of them there. Um, well, I would talk about the Kuna. And for both of them, I hope one of them did it. I said, look, if you want to write a definitive doctoral dissertation that will be around for a while and mark you, you may be the last person that can do this. At the time, they didn't have the outboards yet. It's going to be difficult. You're going to have to go to Panama City. You're going to have to find somebody on a sailboat, be friends with them, and then get to go out in a cabin in their boat. Hopefully find someone that's going to be there for a few months. But if you do an anthropological study of the Kuna Indian as they go from Stone Age to capitalism in one big step, which is what was happening, that's going to be a paper that's going to get referred to later on. Anyway, they've gone through lots of changes. I feel so happy and privileged that I got to see them and become friends with them at that time in their cultural evolution. And I hope they're happy today. Bye.